Right, okay. Let's talk then a little bit about this thing called the founder effect and something else called a genetic bottleneck. Very much related to each other. I think as somebody said, maybe it was Jacob, that the founder effect and genetic bottlenecks are both examples of something called genetic drift, where the frequency of alleles within a population changes over time. The founder effect happens where, as Adam and Jacob described, you've got a larger population from which some individuals break off to form a smaller, removed community. So, we have a look. Let's say that this shape represents all the genetic diversity in a population of a species living in a certain geographical region. Okay? If some individuals of that population move to another location and there is no transfer of genes between these two populations, then this population will have a smaller amount of genetic diversity than the original population from which they broke off. Okay? Let's take a set of 4 different genes. We'll call these genes A, B, C and D. Okay? A, B, C and D. Easy peasy. How many different alleles of each of these genes are there, Tom? Yeah, you do, because you're a biology student. 2. Good man. So, if this is capital A, then the other allele is little a. We'll see. Okay? This imaginary population has got 8 different alleles in it. Okay? Let's say 2 individuals of this population move to this area here. Okay? And those individuals have both got the same genotype.
Now little a, big B, little c, big D.
Little a, big B, little c, big D. Alright? So, can you see that this population has only got 4 alleles in it? And both of the individuals in this population have got the same alleles as each other. Yeah? So, the founder effect is where you take a number of individuals and you take their alleles away from a large gene pool to form a smaller gene pool. And a good example of it is the Amish people. Because they there's 3 different groups of Amish people. How many individuals in each group does it say in the paper?
14,000.
About 14,000, which is not a massive number of people. Why are the Amish people an isolated group?
There are no outsiders come in.
Because there's no outsiders that come in.
No variants, and there's no more genes which can get passed on to the people.
Okay, yeah, so there's no variation from outside of the population coming in. How many people are the group that was in that study descended from? How many individuals does that group that they studied descend from? I think it was called Lancaster County Amish people or something like that.
What was the question?
How many people is that group that they studied descended from?
Was it only two?
Just 2 people. Okay, so they had 2 founders founded that community of 14,000 people. Now just think about that. That's 14,000 people. As many people as will fit in, I don't know.
It's a lot of birthday presents.
Hey?
A lot of birthday presents.
Yeah. As many people as will fit in like Grimsby Town Stadium or something like that. All descended from 2 people.
But it doesn't.
Just a minute, so let me finish my point, right? So those 2 people, those original 2 people and their alleles was the entire gene pool. And since those 2 people, no new genes have come into that community. So all those 14,000 people share exactly the same alleles as the 2 parents. Now that doesn't mean that they're all identical to the parents, because as we tried to learn last lesson, there's this phenomenon called independent assortment of chromosomes and crossing over between the chromosomes. So every generation, the children, the offspring, will have a slightly different mixture of those alleles. But eventually, because there were only 2 individuals, the same allele combinations are going to start cropping up together throughout the generations. One of the combinations is of 2 recessive alleles which cause this Ellis von whatever it's called syndrome, okay, which is dwarfism, a rare form of dwarfism. Yeah. You what?
Just his lot.
Revealed.
Sorry, Alice?
Revealed.
Creeville. Right. So I want to ask you, why is it more likely, when you've only got a small number of founders, that you will find these genetic diseases cropping up?
No adaptation.
No, it's not to do with adaptation, it's to do with alleles.
Because there's only a certain amount of values in there in pheasants. There's only a small amount. So eventually, the same thing's going to keep popping up in a large population.
Yeah, okay, so you've got a limited number of alleles, so you are going to start seeing the same genetic diseases. But why are you more likely to see recessive diseases, where you've had only a small number of founders?
You've got a small number of alleles, you're more likely to get 2 people with the same recessive gene.
Absolutely, yeah. Where you've only got a small number of alleles and you've got large numbers of offspring, there's more chance that those 2 recessive alleles will come together. Okay? So, in this population, we could count the frequency of the different alleles. Okay? And the different alleles, what is the frequency of the capital A allele in this population? Well, 1's not a frequency.
1 in 8.
1 in 8. Okay. Which is what, 12.5%. Okay. So we could say that the frequency of that allele in the population is 12.5%, or 1 in 8 of the alleles in that population would have a capital A. What's the frequency of the little a then? 1 in 8. So little a, also 12.5%. Let's look at this population, which has been founded from a small number of founders. Tom Murphy, what's the frequency of the little a allele in this population?
4.
because there's 4 alleles, and one of them is a little a.
Yeah, but sorry, you said there was like 14,000 people from 2 people, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, but surely, if there's 14,000 people from the people on the left, the people on the right aren't going to make 14,000 people.
No, no.
No, what I'm saying is, originally, the Amish people
Yeah.
migrated to America from places like Germany and Holland and places like that, which is this large population.
Right.
Okay? And 2 people moved to this place called Lancaster County, and they, over many, many generations, gave rise to a population that is now 14,000 people strong. But what I'm saying to you is that those 14,000 people have never had any new alleles come into their population. So they share exactly the same gene pool as those original 2 people. Right?
Yeah, okay.
So the point I'm trying to make is that the frequency of alleles changes when you get this founder effect.
So less alleles were out of the line.
Yeah, alleles that were only in a small frequency in the original population, in the new population they've doubled their frequency. They're twice as common in this population, yeah? Because you haven't got any of these alleles. You haven't got the large A allele, you haven't got the big C, and you haven't got the little D or the little B allele, because you've lost them. You left them behind in the original population when you migrated to America, if you're an Amish person, right? Another example, you've heard of the Galapagos Islands and Darwin's finches? Yeah, the Galapagos Islands are, obviously they're islands separated by water, and the idea is that originally these islands would have been barren places with no animals living there, but the finches migrated from the mainland, Galapagos Islands, I don't know, in South America or Africa or somewhere like that.
They're on the equator.
On the equator, I think it's South America.
Pacific.
Yeah. So these birds would have had to fly from the mainland to get to these islands, and when they arrived, they would have arrived in small numbers, right? So they would have been founders. You would have seen this founder effect in them because they would have taken just a small subset of the variation of the main population. Yeah. So these 2 populations exhibit different variances from each other, or they exhibit different characteristics from each other because they've got a different gene pool. Now, if left over time with no exchange of genes between each other, then if there's enough genetic drift and enough mutations accumulate in this population that don't accumulate in this population, then you could get to a point where you get something called speciation, which is where they split into 2 separate species. How would you know that these populations had split into 2 separate species?
The genes will be significantly different.
Okay, so you could look at their genes, you could compare the genes to each other. What makes a species a species?
If they can't produce fertile offspring, then they're not a species.
Yeah, so eventually you accumulate so much variation between you that when your gametes form a zygote, the chromosomes don't match up with each other in homologous pairs anymore, and so your offspring, if you can form any, are not fertile. They can't produce offspring of their own. An example of that is donkeys and horses.
Donkeys can't breed with donkeys.
You are,
Donkeys can't breed with them.
well, they can breed with other donkeys, and they can breed with horses to produce mules, but mules are infertile. So that's the founder effect. Let's turn this off.